Hi, welcome. Those of you who are joining us live, thanks for coming. Those of you who are watching remotely, thank you for coming too. My name is Hannah Evans. I am a research associate here at Springtide. I am going to add, Fetzer here. Okay, so this conversation that we're having today is a part of the study being done by Fetzer. Hi.
Hello, how are you this morning?
I'm good. I was just introing a little bit about your study, but do you want to intro the study before we have Mohammed join us? I'm not sure.
No, we'll have Mohammed join and we'll let him start off. Sounds great.
Let me see where he is. Okay, great. Make sure that he joins here. Okay. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
As we started, talk a little bit about you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here with you for this conversation. It's been really near and dear to my heart just with the research itself, which my name is Jillian. I'm been with the Fetzer Institute for some time and continued on as a research consultant for them on this body of work. I want to just say right off the bat that I'm a mother of at least one Gen Z. She's about to turn 25, but my son is kind of on the cusp. I don't know how we consider that. He's a millennial. He's 27, but I see, and particularly during the challenge of the pandemic, how that hit both the younger millennials and the older Gen Zs. But as a mother of two Gen Zs and just really close to this body of work, I'm just excited to be here and share more about, why we think studying spirituality is important for people of all ages, but, particularly as how our youngest adults make meaning and sense in their life. So happy to be a part of the conversation.
That's great. I think we're having some issues having Fetzer join, so hopefully that will get solved here in a minute. It looks like every time I try to accept, it's not going through.
I wonder.
Go ahead. Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I'm happy to follow your lead and continue the conversation however you like. I know
yes,
we want Fetzer a part of this for sure.
For sure, definitely. Let me see if I keep adding them manually, but
why don't I leave for a moment and see if they can come back in, and then I can come back.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because of one, and then I hope I can request to join again.
Okay.
Let me just try that.
Technology errors are kind of the name of the game. Let's see if that works. Okay, for some reason, they're not loading here. I wonder if they're trying via a laptop. But let's see if we can invite Jillian back, since it looks like that issue is not getting resolved by leaving her out of the conversation. Hi.
I'm back.
Welcome back. I think they might be joining via some other, I don't know if they're joining via a phone or a computer, but the issue does not have anything to do with you.
It's just technology. We love it. We love it, and we have to deal with it.
That's very true. While we are trying to get all of that stuff sorted, do you want to talk a little bit about the project that you were working on?
Yeah, because I am in a lucky and unique position of having started this project when I was with the Fetzer Institute, and there is the Fetzer Institute. Yay! Here we are.
Welcome. Hi.
Hello. So we had a few things to figure out here on the technology.
No worries at all.
Yes.
Do you want to introduce yourself, Mohammed, and talk a little bit about the Fetzer Institute?
Yes, my name is Hamid Mohammed. I'm a senior program officer at the Fetzer Institute. I've been with the Institute about 12 years. And what attracts me to the Institute is its work that is holistic and that focuses on fulfillment and human flourishing. And yeah, that's me in brief. And Jillian and I have worked on this particular project for about 5-6 years now.
That's amazing. Yeah. So do you guys want to talk a little about the project itself? Because I know there's a couple components to it. There was a pre-pandemic and a post-pandemic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe before that, if I can say a few words about the Fetzer Institute. The Fetzer Institute is
Absolutely.
a private foundation located in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Going back, we started going back to the 50s, 1954. But our work really scaled up in the 1980s. It was founded by John Fetzer, who was an engineer about 100 years ago in 1923. He designed and built the first radio station that was the foundation of his wealth and his journey. And also reflecting back to this moment, in 1918, there was another pandemic. I don't know if how many people know that actually killed 15 million people and infected 500 million, which was more devastating than the current one. But the significance of that pandemic was John Fetzer himself was bedridden for 9 months. And coming out of that, he made a commitment to dedicate his life to spiritual work of the Creator. So there's a link between what happened 100 years ago to him personally and to the world and this moment. I just wanted to highlight. Our work focuses on spirituality and science, and our mission is to help build the spiritual foundation for a loving world. And the reason is without these two like the spiritual and the scientific, it's a broad spectrum. The world doesn't hold together, and we continue to face the kinds of crises that we experienced not too long ago. So that's the Fetzer Institute.
Yeah,
I just wanted to add too something in Mohammed's story that I think is really relevant for this conversation. He was a teenager when he was bedridden with the flu. He was, at of an age that we're talking about now, where you're really trying to find meaning and purpose in life, and for that to happen to him as a teenager, and for him to have this kind of epiphany and commitment to spend the rest of his life serving, the world, I think it's just really striking to me.
Yeah, finding a vocation in the middle of all of that. Yeah, that's really fascinating. Wow. That ties in so interestingly with where we are in our current moment as a society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you guys did this study about spirituality. That's a really broad concept, but I'm sure you delved into so many specific things within that. Do you want to talk a little bit about the study that you've done about spirituality?
Well, maybe I can start and then I'll hand it over to Jillian. The idea was that even though our mission is helping build the spiritual foundation for a loving world, there is a certain assumption behind that about spirituality, about the world, and about love or loving. So what we did was, you can study spirituality from different perspectives. You can study texts, you can study institutions, you can study history, behavior, psychology, and all of that. We felt like religion by itself, studying religion is problematic by itself because there's no singular definition about what religion is that applies across the board to all other faith traditions beyond Christianity. So we felt like there's a little bit of an assumption that we know what spirituality means. And we looked at the literature, and there is no agreement on what spirituality is. There are all sorts of perspectives on that. Then we said, let's ask people what spirituality means to them. So we did that, and the reason is when, as you know, we're not a research institution. We have a purpose and goal to advance our mission. So that was our purpose. How do we connect with our audiences and the people and organizations we serve? So it was in that spirit of understanding our work in the world that we started this work. Jillian?
Mhm. Yeah, that was great, Mohammed. I think that's all true. And you know what, I'll just speak to how this evolved into two surveys, and how, you know, maybe there's a continuation of more, but I think it's really significant to say, when we started this research and the idea of this research in 2018 or so, and then fielded it, you know, as it takes some time to develop the body of research, we had a really robust qualitative stage. I'll talk in a little bit about just some of the unique ways that we asked about spirituality in this survey. But when after we did a qualitative stage with in-depth interviews and focus groups, we started to develop the survey, fielded that survey in January and February of 2020. Unbeknownst to us, we had clean data. You know, obviously in March, everything just shut down. And we began then to launch this research, really make it public in the height of the height of that first year when we're all in quarantine in 2020. And immediately, as we're all kind of struggling and trying to adapt to what was becoming a new normal, being quarantined and at home, and here we are, you know, on Zoom calls launching this research about spirituality. We had one advisor in particular who just kept on asking, you know, how are we drawing on our spiritual wells right now during this difficult time? And that really struck us as we continued to launch brand new research about all of Americans, how they think and talk about spirituality, to think about, well, gosh, how would people answer these questions right now? And that stuck with us, and then allowed us to, you know, get some support internally to help launch another study that would be towards the end of the pandemic. So we can't say we were totally out of it, but it was late last year that we refielded it, so we could have a little bit of a comparison of how people thought and talked about spirituality in 2020 versus late 2022. So we asked some additional questions about how did your spiritual life change, what's the, you know, status of your mental health, spiritual health, and a number of others that could look at what really changed for people as they reflected on their spiritual practices and identity and furthermore. So it turned into a really nice coupling between the beginning of the pandemic and after the pandemic, and yet close enough that we even have a larger data set of how Americans think and talk about spirituality.
That's awesome. That's so cool. And that's so great how you had this like opportunity, I think, that the pandemic offered because of the timing of the first wave of your study, that you decided to incorporate another component. That's so interesting. And I'm really excited to hear you talk more about some of the methodologies you guys used. So Springtide is specifically focused on young people's experiences and sense of community and identity, and that certainly includes spirituality. And we focus on 13 to 25-year-olds, but I know you guys were surveying 18 to 25-year-old and up, but 18 and up, including 18 to 25-year-olds. So what kinds of trends or patterns did you notice among those 18 to 25-year-olds that you studied that were unique to young people studying spirituality?
Right. Mohammed, I'll go ahead and field this one, which is some of what we found as we've been talking about preparing for this. Good reminder, I'm not going to repeat stats the whole way through, though I'm likely to lean into that, so just stop me if I just start spouting numbers. But I'll just say generally, and different from the other generational cohorts, Gen Z is the least spiritual and religious in terms of self-identification. That said, when I say least, I mean that when you look at the numbers and you look at the extent of other spiritual identity, earlier cohorts like boomers and the silent generation are more apt to identify as moderately and very spiritual. But that said, with the Gen Z, 77% of all Gen Zs are spiritual to some degree, right? And I know that mirrors figures that you have about Gen Z. So this and, you know, just slightly less in terms of religious identification. So I think there is this assumption that Gen Z has just dropped off the map, right? That they're just not there with their spiritual and religious identification. And that's not true in our findings. Just to give a little bit of qualitative feel to that, how how this generation talks about spirituality, I think, is really interesting. Here's a few quotes we have, and I'll talk about the drawings in a moment, one of our unique methodologies, but we have the open-ended question for all of our respondents of how they would describe spirituality. What does it mean to them? So we have here, I'm going to read one from a 24-year-old male, identifies as moderately spiritual, slightly religious, says he's agnostic. But he says this spirituality to him is human attempts at finding meaning beyond our immediate environment and understandings, especially in ways that relate to a greater purpose or harmonious connection with the world. So this sense of, something more, that spirituality offers that sense to connecting with something more. Here's another from a 20-year-old female Hindu. A feeling or sense of belief that there is something greater than myself, something more to being human than sensory experience. And one of my favorites is this from an 18-year-old female who's slightly spiritual, not at all religious, and has just this, kind of cogent description. Spirituality is a connection to something beyond yourself, maybe a concept or belief, usually that can't be inherently observed or proven, but that you hang on to because it makes you feel something. So these, words from our youngest Americans are really connecting to something that is beyond themselves, hard to put into words, but it's a connection that makes you feel something. And I just think that's quite beautiful.
Yeah, one of the things we've seen a lot in our studies is the importance of a sense of purpose for young people, and it's really exciting to hear that some of what you're seeing is the same themes of meaning and purpose to their lives.
Right. And as Mohammed shared earlier, that kind of sense of almost a grounding too, that we can't just look at, one domain or another, but that the spiritual world just helps ground people where they're going. I can share a little bit more about some of the ways that the Gen Z is different than some other Americans or other generational cohorts. I just wanted to mention, we ask about spiritual practices or activities that people engage in that they identify as either spiritual or religious. Generally, Gen Z followed other generational cohorts in identifying prayer, art, being in nature, reading, and yoga as some of their most practiced activities. However, Gen Z is more likely than any other generational cohort to engage in writing as a spiritual activity. I have a Gen Z daughter-in-law, and remember just being so struck by how much she journals and what that means to her, and that sense of writing as a practice, I think, is really interesting. They're also more likely to attend other religious or spiritual groups. We asked about attending a religious service or, religious service. This is asking, do you attend a group, religious or spiritual, other than the service? And they're more likely than any other generational cohort to attend other religious or spiritual groups, and more likely than any other generational cohort to use tarot cards or to engage in fortune telling, which is another kind of out of the traditional norm as a practice.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah, I also want to add to that. Given that it was a time of uncertainty, we observed that people, not just Gen Z, but others there was an uptick on how they used tarot, probably something to probe into in the future. Another thing is, even though the Gen Z members behave a certain way, it doesn't mean that's how they will behave in the future. There's a developmental aspect to it. The younger you are, the more you're likely to learn and discover. So there are those things. It just shows a snapshot of what this moment looks like.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that leads really well into something else I wanted to ask about, which is that in your study, you mentioned that 45% of your respondents said they become more spiritual in their lives. And I'm curious, why do you think this is the case? And do you think that there are implications in this for young people? Gen Z is young now, but in 50 years, are they going to become more spiritual than they are now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say generally, we saw this finding in the Gen Z as well, that we didn't see as much changes in their cohort from 2020 to 2022. There was a slight downtick for other generational cohorts in terms of their desire, their aspiration to be more spiritual. However, that said, and just to make that clear, Gen Z didn't have really any change. They continued to have a desire to be more spiritual. What we found is a couple significant correlations with that. One is that the more spiritual you identify, if you're moderately or very spiritual, the more you aspire to be spiritual. So there's a strong connection there. If you already have this sense of spirituality in your life, there is this sense that it is not even developmental, but in addition to being developmental, is a journey, that this identification of spirituality is a journey that you're on. And when you have kind of embraced that in your life, there's a desire to have more of that or continue to grow. So I think that's really interesting. And I found a quote here from a 20-year-old female on this: moderately spiritual, moderately religious, kind of refers to a little bit of the journey. My own personal journey to my purpose in life. That's how she defines spirituality.
And that kind of comes back to that purpose element again. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So each year, Springtide has a flagship report, the State of Religion and Young People. Our 2023 report, which comes out later this fall, specifically explores the ways that young people are experiencing sacred moments or sacred encounters in their lives. And we have a section in the report where we look at the ways that young people are identifying as religious or spiritual. And we look at the different markers of spiritual practice beyond the box that somebody checks. So Springtide's latest numbers reflect what you were saying, which is that 78% of young people ages 13 to 25 label themselves as at least slightly spiritual, and 67% identify as at least slightly religious. And we know that, like you mentioned before, people often think of Gen Z as not interested in religion or spirituality. So what is something you wish more people understood about the changes in religion and spirituality over the course of a person's life?
Yes. So one of the ways to understand that question is to look. History is not always a good lens, but that's where we go. If you look back, 50, 60 years ago, around World War II, there was a sort of, between the two world wars, there was a loss, a sense of loss and despair and so forth. And then coming out of World War II in the 50s, there was increasing religiosity. The best-selling literature was the Bible, and people were going to church, and it was family about family values and so forth. And then in the 60s, you see the opposite trend, and in the 70s, it comes back up. So it changes over time. And also, it's not just in the lives of people, but in the lives of institutions as well. There's a lot of denominational split because of political issues, social issues, and other things. And I think over time, what that led to is what happens in the political sphere, what happens within the religious institutions and generally in societies, sort of created sort of a sense of people needed space, and that space was not provided by existing institutions. Therefore, people found other ways to gather and explore their spirituality. So you can see that from that perspective, spiritual, like a sort of institutional split and decline and evolution, and also the politics plays a huge role, and whatever else happens, like technology in society. So going forward, I think it is really hard to predict what will happen, but if these things were sort of our barometer to gauge what can happen, it can go up and down. We'll see changes. We'll continue to see changes. Nothing will stay the same.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Looking back in history, and also just our most recent history. I mean, we haven't we haven't talked a lot about, I did at the very beginning, but just what it was like for Gen Z to be kind of coming of age during the pandemic, and what that felt like. Like, I know for myself, my own Gen Z and older Gen Z millennial, one had just gotten married, one was, in the middle of college, and having to just kind of adjust to the beginning of their lives to this, massive shutdown. I want to read can I read a couple more quotes from just people, Gen Z, and how they, it just gives so much what we know happened, but hearing it in their own words, is both poignant and hopeful, I think, in some of these quotes. But here's someone who really struggled. This was a 20-year-old female Baptist, slightly spiritual, slightly religious. She said, her life changed because the pandemic had impacted her greatly due to being a high school 2020 graduate. It impacted the greatest moments of my life. Here is someone reflecting in their 20 years, what do they have to look back on? Graduation is the biggest moment of their life at that point, right? Life felt very unfair, so it was hard to find hope in my religion and spirituality. So that's one perspective there. Another 25-year-old Buddhist, I've never really been connected to religion. I feel like its significance has decreased in my life since the pandemic because other problems took priority. But here's some other perspective. An 18-year-old male. I became more spiritual through independent worship, prayer, and study, while being less religious, attending service as a group. So at a young age, recognizing that what his spiritual life could do for him when his religion no longer was able to serve him, right? Another 25-year-old female had to have faith that life would get better and continue on. I felt like most humans lost their purpose during lockdown. So the sense of having faith in something that was going to keep her going. And finally, a 22-year-old male, moderately spiritual, moderately religious, who's Christian, thinking about what is important in life and thinking about holding folks accountable for locking down the country. So you have this perspective of both, what's important, but having a political opinion about that. So these are this wide range of feeling really pessimistic about the future, about feeling optimistic and seeing potential in their spiritual life, to just being kind of maybe not connected to their spirituality, but connected to what was happening with the government, what was happening with all these other forces, and feeling maybe disillusioned. So that range exists in the Gen Z, just as it existed, as we saw in our research, across all the generations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe something to add to this is this generation has faced something previous generations in recent history have not faced. We're calling it polycrisis. Environmental crisis, health crisis, war, all sorts of things, inequality. So they are practicing their spirituality in this environment. And in our study, we saw that in the middle of suffering, people reacted in two ways. Some people doubled down and became very spiritual and had spiritual growth, whereas others disaffiliated themselves from their traditions. So we saw those things. It's probably not a surprise in the face of something horrendous like we have faced over the last 3 years.
I want to, just in response to that, which is, I think this is a great way, segue. We haven't talked about it so much, and you can't see these very well. I'm going to hold one up. One of our unique methodologies with this study was we had found this during our focus groups of the previous study, asking people at the beginning of every focus group that we had to draw, this before we had any conversation, draw what spirituality means to you. And then they would have a discussion about that in the focus group. Well, we learned so much from that when we worked with the University of Chicago, NORC, to field this second survey. And again, we surveyed over 3,600 Americans. This was a nationally representative survey, so really robust data. But what we added into it was an ability for in the survey itself, whether on your phone or on a tablet, people could draw what spirituality meant to them. We asked that question, but it was, kind of at scale. That said, we wanted to do a bit of an experiment, so only half of our respondents were asked to draw. We wanted to see if there was any difference in the survey responses when someone starts off a survey kind of using the right side of their brain and drawing what spirituality means. But to this point that Mohammed made about how we may draw on our spiritual lives during times of crisis or chaos. So here's a description of the drawing first, and then I'll show you. To me, spirituality represents rising above the chaos and confusion of mundane and confusing corporal existence. In the picture, I rise above the chaos and shine free. So you can see, if you can see it here, this is his kind of chaos, and here he is rising above.
Can you skip back?
Can you see that?
Go pull it away from your camera. There you go. Perfect. Oh, that's so interesting. Look at that.
Yeah. And this is a 24-year-old male, very spiritual, slightly religious, and doesn't identify with a denomination. This is, Mohammed knows this is my favorite of them all. Probably our most artistic of all the drawings. This is a 24-year-old male, and I think it shows up backwards, so you might not be able to read it, but you can see him with a peace symbol. But what he says here, which I really love that he wrote it into the drawing, I don't know who watches over us, but I hope they are proud of us.
I love that too. I see why you love that. Yeah.
So there's a lot, there's a lot of nuance here, and I think in general for all of us, in our spiritual lives, but I think it shows up in pretty profound ways for Gen Z, and given what we all shared about just the challenge of this particular generational cohort kind of coming of age or struggling with growing older in the midst of a complete lockdown and a change in their social, spiritual, religious lives, all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting. And I'm already taking notes in my head about how we can incorporate some visual components in our future surveys, because that is such a cool and creative way. I love the visual component in the way that it gets people to even think about the questions a little bit differently. And I think it captures some of the mystery and emotional complexity of spirituality. Like, it's not something you're always thinking, it's something you're experiencing. And I love the way that the visual stuff like encapsulates the complexity of that. I think that's really beautiful, and the mystery of that too. Yeah. So, thinking about the future of, what this study will mean going forward, but also just the future of spirituality in the United States. Do you think the landscape will stay the same as it has? How do you think it might shift? Mohammed, you talked about the nature of things just always shifting. Nothing's going to stay the same. Do you think that that's our, our future, or what do you think might happen going forward?
Okay. Before I answer that question, you talked about the method, the drawing. We are also doing some work around even going beyond visualization of what spirituality means to them. This is something that we're exploring. What are the other dimensions of spirituality that we can possibly incorporate in studies in general, in studies in the future, including the use of AI. So. More to come on that. Maybe in 6 months or so, we'll have something to report. As far as the next 20 years, things will change at the rate of how the world is changing, which is faster than it used to. We're approaching a world that's going to be dominated by other forms of intelligence other than human intelligence. Machines and algorithms will be a part of our lives. So those things will change how we experience or how we engage in spirituality. I would say it will be dramatic, in my opinion, if you ask me to guess. It will be very dramatic. It won't be the same or steady. We will see a lot of changes over the next 20 years. And there's also, the generation behind the Gen Z, and they will also influence what will happen going forward when the baby boomers will be replaced by Gen X, like me and Jillian. So there would be a lot of shift around that. The spirituality of baby boomers that was informed by what happened after World War II and in the 60s,
Yeah.
that will change dramatically. This will be something informed by things that happen today. And technology in particular, the influence of technology will inform that. So in my opinion, it will be very dramatic.
Yeah, I have a hard time really, we just can't predict the future and what it's going to look like. I think that just based on, this research that there will always be a need, and these young people in our research show us, to make sense of their world, to find, a way to have meaning and purpose. And what may change is how that is structured and where they go to find it, to see whether this plays out over time or is just a developmental phase, as Mohammed suggests, but that they lean into non-traditional practices, and the institutions that help support that will necessarily need to adjust to look at these different ways that young people engage in their spiritual and faith lives. So time will tell how that shapes, but I think what is always true, and this is developmental, is that we need spaces and people and practices to help us make meaning in our life and to connect to something beyond ourselves. I know, and just looking at my own development, I was thinking about this, reflecting on the question of just how, why I find this research really fascinating. My parents were in the silent generation, but they were definitely counterculture. I describe them as kind of bohemian hippie types. And they were I grew up decidedly anti-religious in an anti-religious household. My parents were forced to go to church, so they said. And so my brother and I were not exposed. But from a young age, I grew up in New Mexico, which is very diverse culturally, a lot of Catholic, Hispanics, and every other, faith tradition is represented. And I was because I didn't have it myself, I so desired to understand other traditions. And that curiosity, really informed me to this day of just understanding this diverse population, how do we appreciate and find each other's spiritual lives. And so I hope that, the future of this research and the work that you're doing just continues to open that up for other people to appreciate. There's a lot of diversity and nuance, but we're all grounded in a certain way by this sense of wanting to connect to something more and to help make, sense of our lives. So who knows what the future will hold, but that need, I think, will always be there.
The desire for connection is one of the most human things about us, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This project is so interesting, and I really enjoyed reading the report. I'm looking forward to when the other wave, the next part, comes out. When is that coming out? Do you guys know? This fall sometime, or?
Yes, this fall.
Okay. That'll be
October, November.
Yeah. So how can people follow the other work that you guys are working on and learn more about Fetzer Institute generally?
The best place to go to find out about what the Fetzer Institute is doing and about our study is fetzer.org. You can also find us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, at Fetzer Institute.
Awesome.
And would love to hear from you. We have a lot of resources on our websites too.
Yeah, absolutely. Go check them out. It's great. There's a lot of really interesting stuff on there. And for more of Springtide's research, you can follow us here on Instagram. Probably if you're watching this, you are following us, but if you're not, you should do that. And across social media at We Are Springtide, and then springtideresearch.org. I don't think we got any questions during this conversation, but is there anything you guys want people who are watching to understand about Fetzer or about your study before we wrap up?
Yes, probably one more thing. What the Fetzer Institute is trying to do is to bring the richness of our spiritual lives into our more and more secularized lives that separate your spiritual life and your material or rational life. We believe in wholeness, the wholeness of reality, the wholeness of people. the wholeness of nature. Please join us in this work, and we're working with all sorts of people and organizations, and follow us, learn about the Fetzer Institute and the work we do. This is something that we are doing for our world together with you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. Thank you to everyone
Hannah.
who watched. Yeah, looking forward to a future of many opportunities to work with Fetzer and the work you guys are continuing to do. And Springtide is really excited to be a part of that. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful.